Today I'm going to share something that's honestly kind of hard for me to talk about. At the time, it sort of felt like I was blowing up my life and starting from scratch. It's like everything up until that point, my identity, who I was, just completely burst apart, and I was left to just start back at the beginning to figure out who I was and to build a new life for myself in order to start over and create a creative career. So often growing up, I lived off of extrinsic motivation. I worried about what other people thought of me. I got a boost of confidence if someone said something positive about my performance. And in high school, I wasn't quite sure of who I was, and I was timid and sort of afraid to stand up for myself. I was a nerd. I wasn't a cool kid. And while I did have an incredible group of friends whom I'm very grateful for, I also often felt like an outcast. And so I derived a lot of my purpose from people's approval or grades or being productive. And I think I didn't let myself explore things fully. Like I was always motivated to be on a stable path forward and appear successful to others rather than actually find inner purpose or fulfillment. And although my parents, who were musicians, really encouraged me to pursue my interests, I always felt like I had to do something practical, something that would for sure end in a stable job, partially because I had seen them work so hard in often working multiple jobs at once. I just felt like that was a lot of effort, and I just wanted something simple and stable. More than that, I just felt like that was a message I was getting from society, that if I did something creative, it would be unstable and that it would just be a hard life, and I don't have a guarantee that it would even work out. Like my parents were lucky that they were able to forge careers in a creative field, and I thought that they were sort of the exception. So I went to college hoping I could find something I was genuinely interested in, but that also would lead me to a stable career. So when I took Psychology 101, I fell in love with the textbook. I loved learning about people and human motivation and the extremes of the human experience. I loved understanding people and also understanding people's stories. So I thought, you know what? If I just pursue this and get my PhD, I'll probably have a stable career, one that's respected, something that was intellectual. And so this kind of fit the bill for me at the time. So at the ripe age of 18, I decided, okay, I'm going to spend my life working in the field of psychology. I started doing internships, volunteering, doing research in a lab at my college. Then when I finally did get into a PhD program, one that I never dreamed I would ever get into, honestly, you have to have quite a bit of luck even to get in. Like there are definitely a lot of extremely competent applicants. I think there are even like over 700 applicants and only 12 slots in the cohort. And you're applying to work with very specific professors in specific research niches. It's all just very competitive. And when you go, then you feel very special and you feel chosen and you feel like I'm obligated to keep going in this because they gave me this chance that so many other people maybe didn't get. I feel like I need to keep going with it. And so I started doing the work, and what I realized was that in the world of academia, there's a lot of crap you have to deal with in addition to all the good stuff. So I liked the brainstorming, creative ideas around research, and a lot of the process of learning about the human mind. But it's also clinical psychology, which is different from a lot of other psychology PhD programs, or really any kind of PhD program, in that in addition to the typical research work you do and all the classes you take, you also deliver therapy for 2 to 3 days a week. And so you're literally basically working a part-time job on top of doing a PhD program and trying to churn out as much research as possible and apply for grants or awards or funding. I also taught a college course. It's just a lot to juggle at once. And I feel like you kind of have to have thick skin just because the world of academia and research is a little bit cutthroat. And I didn't like that so much of my time was spent on paperwork and IRB applications and all this stuff that wasn't the creative part of it. And I felt like it just wasn't the right culture for me and the right day-to-day of what I was actually doing. It all started with interest, a genuine passion, but it still wasn't right for me. That's what can be so confusing at times. It's not that I wasn't passionate about psychology and mental health. Those are things I'm still passionate about to this day. It's that the initial seed of that passion had long ago been overtaken by the competition, the requirements, the culture that dictated a very specific type of success. The thing about a lot of academic tracks is that there's this path that you take, and then there's always a next step that you're supposed to do. You do your undergrad, you publish papers, you get your PhD, then you do a postdoc, and then you apply for academic positions, after which you continue to try to churn out research so that you get tenure. It's a never-ending stream of steps you need to complete, and all of them require you to let other people judge your worth. In order to succeed, you must impress people. That's almost your job. And in my opinion, that's not a fun way to live. The other thing about the world of academia is that most of the people inside it assume it's the best place to be. And it feels like the longer you stay, the more you're convinced that it would just be insane to leave. And in all of these steps, if you stray away from that path, you're not going to be successful. So for me to not follow that path felt like I was truly giving everything up. And like once I made that decision, I couldn't go back on it. Or at least there would be a lot of damage done. But I remember one day, there was a researcher whom I really, really respected. She sat down a small group of us and she talked to us about how people who are successful in this field are really those that have a lot of grit. The people who are willing to tolerate the challenges and just stick to it, even when it's hard. And really, success in this field is about longevity. And in a way, that's a really cool concept. And I think it could be really inspiring if the field had been right for me. But for me, it was like, okay, I just have to tolerate everything unpleasant that I'm feeling and just be okay with it. Because if I can master that, then I'm going to be okay and I'm going to be successful and I'm going to live up to the expectations I've set for myself. But that just kept me on a path that ultimately wasn't right for me. The good thing is I feel like I have a decent amount of grit, and actually getting my PhD helped me bolster that. I learned to power through and work hard even when I was really miserable. But there's a danger in that type of grit. I'm training myself to keep going even when I'm not happy. On top of that, I had moved halfway across the country to a big city in the Northeast, a city I had never lived in before, and my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, was still in Minnesota, and so we were long distance. I was just sacrificing so much to be there. And mind you, I was being paid like $25,000 a year and living on that stipend. Now, I also want to add, I feel like people stereotype PhD programs to be totally impossible, and I think almost by having gotten my PhD, I've learned how much yes, it's definitely hard, but there are also plenty of hard jobs in this world, hard for many different reasons. And I don't like that implicit stereotype that I think exists, that you're smarter or more accomplished or more worthwhile if you have a PhD. I just don't like that. Getting my PhD helped me realize that. It helped me realize like all the clout and all the stuff that people use to push themselves up is just a facade. And ultimately, people are just people. And a lot of people work hard and a lot of people grow and learn. And these are just labels. I'm getting off on a tangent, but, I did all that and it was nearing the end of my PhD. And I remember one time I was visiting my sister in San Francisco and going out to lunch, I think, with her and one of her friends, who is also a coworker, and they were doing something creative. And I remember just thinking, wait, how do I get that life? Like, why is it that they get to live this super creative life and be talking about these really interesting things, and I'm over here doing this thing that I supposedly think is impressive, but that I'm not fulfilled by? And that was a real moment of realization. It was a turning point for me. Anyway, then soon after that, I was going into my final year of my PhD program, where you actually move somewhere else yet again and you do full-time clinical work for a year. And I was visiting my parents, and then my husband, Andy, and my sister were there. And I just started talking about how I just wasn't feeling fulfilled, like the actual day-to-day of the work. And I told them how I was really craving something creative in my life. Eventually in the conversation, I started playing with the idea of, well, what if I did something else? with my life. On the drive back, which was a long drive back, I was in the car with Andy and my sister, and I kind of brought up the idea, what if I did just do something creative? And at first I was like, well, maybe I could still apply to postdoc, which is sort of the position you often get after you get your PhD, and then on the side explore another career, and then maybe eventually pivot. And then eventually I was like, wait a second, why would I put it off even longer? What if I just didn't apply to postdoc? And I had never even opened that idea in my brain. Like, I just didn't even think that was possible. I'm really grateful that both of them just said, yeah, why don't you? And eventually I realized what I was really interested in was video work. I'd been obsessed with documentaries for years. I honestly felt like I watched more documentaries than anybody I know. It's always been kind of an obsession, but I always assumed I was never capable of doing something like that. It didn't seem like a reasonable dream, so it never occurred to me. But as time went on, I began to think, what if I allowed myself to go for it? So in the last year of my PhD, I started training myself in video just to see if I could actually make a career of it. I started educating myself on photo composition and on video and on editing. It was also a scary thing to do because I was actually getting to the point where I felt somewhat connected in my field. I was actually succeeding. I felt like my dream postdocs were sort of within my grasp. I was getting my name out there. I was publishing more. I was having more conversations with people in the field. I just felt like I had set myself up really well. It was like my work was actually paying off, and that felt great. But then deep down inside, my gut was telling me something was off. Academia was so hierarchical. It felt like I was slowly climbing this ladder, and now was I just going to tip that ladder over? Now, that was sort of at the beginning of my last year of grad school. So I started pursuing some creative things on the side. I basically taught myself photography and videography using online resources and started a photography business. I made ads for local businesses, shot weddings, and started working on a feature film with some local artists. And as I made money gradually, I could buy more gear that would help me grow my business. I just worked really hard on top of this full-time clinical job on top of finishing my dissertation. It was an intense year and I was keeping all this private. Then I finished my PhD, graduated, and there I was at square one again. I wasn't making much money. I was just starting this new career and I didn't know where it would lead me, and it was scary. And it was at that point also that I had to go around and tell everyone in my life, I'm not gonna try to be a professor or to be a psychologist. I'm literally going to start over, and first things first, I'm gonna be a photographer, something you don't even need a college education for, and here I am with a PhD. And I think a lot of people were in shock. Like, I had to look them in the face and explain to them my decision. Someone at a wedding asked me, how are you going to be intellectually stimulated? Like, are you going to be happy? And was like questioning my life decisions. And I get it, but I also am like, the whole point was that I wasn't being stimulated. I wasn't able to be creative in the specific ways I wanted to be while in academia. And it was just a lot of people assuming things about me, or kind of assuming I went off the deep end or lost my mind in a way. In actuality, it was a very planned thing. Like, for a year, I was working on the side to make this plan possible. And yes, I didn't make much money at first, and it was a hard transition. And there were a lot of moments I was just like, what am I doing? But what I kept coming back to was that before, I was living for extrinsic reasons. I was living to impress people, to make other people happy, to live up to their expectations, or at least my perception of their expectations. And now I was living for the process, not the final product, not what looks good to other people, but for enjoying the craft of my work. And that was something I had missed before. Now, I will cut to the chase and tell you that now I'm working for a company as an audio producer, creating audio documentaries. It's really fun work. And I also have this YouTube channel, which is another sort of job for me I do on the side. Now, it's not like every day is bright and shiny roses and that it's easy. Like, it is hard work, but I enjoy the craft and the process and the journey so much more. And it's just such a better fit. And I was around 28 when I made this career change several years ago, and I felt like I was so late to the game. But really, I was still super young. And I still am super young, and I still don't know exactly where my life will lead me. But by finally looking people in the eye and telling them that essentially I was failing in their eyes, or at least I perceived it to be that way, I was finally freed by sort of blowing up everything I had been working toward. And by saying, I'm going to live for me, not for anybody else. I'm just going to live for me. It transformed my life and how I see myself and where my purpose lies. I'm finally free. And sometimes even now, I probably take that a little bit for granted, but it took a big risk because I was so planful. It felt like I was truly giving up years and thousands of hours of work. But I also don't regret it. And maybe at times I regret, like, should I have gone all the way? And who knows where I'd be in the creative field now if I had just pursued a more creative path. But I also do use what I learned in my PhD in clinical psychology, like all the time, practically every day. And it does give me a distinct perspective. And it also does just kind of take out the power of clout and all these like external degrees or labels we put on people that indicates they're like better or smarter or more experienced. It made me realize I didn't need to be intimidated by other people just because they had impressive resumes. Just because they have some impressive label doesn't mean they by definition have more to offer than I do. And so even that on its own, in addition to all the knowledge I gained, it kind of freed me. It allowed me to see all these labels, all these things we use to try to build ourselves up or to even build other people up and idolize other people. Quite often, they are just that. They are just labels. And sometimes we just have to take a risk on ourselves and look internally and realize I am worthy just because I'm human. And we all have something to bring to the table. I think part of it was like, I didn't know if I was creative enough or worthwhile enough to do something creative. Like I felt like you had to be this brilliant person in order to be successful in a creative industry. But what I realized was that in many ways, there's no real such thing as genius, in that everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. And genius is just sort of a term we use to put certain people on a pedestal. We all have something to offer. And now, because of all the risks I took and my willingness to fail in other people's eyes, I am freed to live the life I want to live and to live for me. And I feel like I had to stop living up to expectations, to reevaluate my priorities, and to live for the process, not the destination. So I know this is a lot to share, and if you've stuck around this long, thanks for taking the time to listen to my story. If you're somebody who's considering a career change, or maybe it's not a full career change, but it's just pursuing something creative or different from what you've done in your past, just remember that you're allowed to take a risk on yourself. You're allowed to not live up to expectation. You're allowed to find joy in the little things, and you're allowed to live for yourself. And I feel like that almost sounds selfish. I don't mean don't care about other people. I'm not saying don't care about the world, but I just mean don't live purely fueled by what other people think of you, because that is genuinely how I used to live. If I'm honest, it's embarrassing to admit, but that is how I lived. And I feel like I'm finally free of that. And it actually allows me to more fully be myself and then to actually be better, because I'm able to put forward my ideas without shame. I'm just going for it. And ultimately, I think I create better work that way. Anyway, thank you for just listening and taking that time. If you enjoyed this video, liking it is a great way to support the channel. This is kind of an unusual video for me, so I doubt it's gonna do very well or anything, but I just wanted to make it anyway. And also, if you want to see more videos from me on minimalism, on simple living, on making life a tad easier, please hit the subscribe button below. That's another great way to honestly support the channel. So if you'd take a moment to do either of those things, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so much for spending this little bit of time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.